economic self-sustainability, land and water, and culture. OHA's revenue and funds should not be parceled or funneled through any of the 5 strategic plan priorities: education, health, economic self-sustainability, land and water, and culture, to inside-outside agents that will convert it to governance, objectives, expenditures, example, nation building, nation-to-nation conference, etc. No monies to AR governance through the front doors, side doors, or back doors. Ehanakako.
Thank you, Jermaine.
Thank you.
Mahalo, Jim.
Any questions? Thank you.
Madam Chair, just for the record, I would like to point out, I appreciate your manal. I'd like to point out that much of OHA's political advocacy in Washington, D.C. is triggered to the fact that there are over 250 entitlements, millions and millions of dollars. We now have an unfriendly administration in Washington, D.C., and I think rather than back off, we should ramp up our diligence, utilizing our offices, working closely with organizations like CNHA to ensure that these entitlements continue and that Hawaiians receive these continued support from the Congress and from the President of the United States. So that is one of the rationale that I think is solid and makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Jermaine.
You're welcome.
I'd like to turn the time over to Pohana now.
Mahalo, Chair Hulu Lindsay, and good morning, trustees. As the chair stated, this is a continuation of our budget biennial workshop. We had left off the last time with respect to trustee concerns with a number of areas, grants, other areas with respect to the budget in terms of, excuse me, how we have been able to make up funding for particular areas, especially with fringe benefit, the personnel, not only grants, but then a deeper dive into some of the areas that we had planned for. So what we'd like to present for administration today to you is to look over our original budget that we had proposed for fiscal year biennial 18 and 19. And then from the previous workshop, what we had reduced in the budget in those categories. And then further areas that are on the plate that we are still looking at for either further reductions or trying to identify the funds for certain categories. And then at the same time, we like to address some feedback from Trustee Hulu's correspondence with you with regard to your concerns with further areas of the budget. But in particular, the 3 areas is assuring funding for the financial audit of $500,000, the shortfall from the legislature regarding the state general funds, how we have been able to either accommodate that, and then where did we put the money, and then lastly is the reduction of our spending policy from 5% to 4.5%. So if I may, Chair, I call upon John Kim, our new CFO David Laeha, and our Kapo Nui Lisa Victor. We'll be presenting, a majority of the presentation will be done by John, but we'll be presenting comments just in case trustees have the other areas so we can address them as well. Okay.
Do you have anything to pass out? Oh, okay.
So as a summary, trustees, from our last budget workshop, all of us have gone and met with the directors, the managers, the staff, with review over contracts, with review in all of the major areas that you see with respect to personnel, program, grants, travel, equipment, overhead, and debt service. So as you can see, this is the fiscal year 2018 budget, and again, as I expressed earlier, how we propose our original budget After the workshops, we had greater information and clearer direction on where we need to make budget reductions. We did that, and then we're coming back forward with not only the variance, but areas that we want to share in terms of either further reductions and
I'm sorry,
so, Kim.
Mahalo, Madam Chair and trustees, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity for us to come back to have this third budget workshop. You know, I don't know that many people who likes to talk about budget, especially with me for on three different occasions. So I definitely appreciate the opportunity to share some of the updates. Again, thank you for a lot of the questions and comments that you have provided to us since the first budget workshop, and it really provided as a guidance in focusing on some of the areas that we need to take a harder look into. So today we wanted to take this opportunity to go over some of the changes that has been implemented since the last time we discussed the budget, and to discuss where the budget currently sits. Hopefully, during our discussion, we'll be able to address a lot of the questions that you have submitted to Madam Chair's office, and whatever is not addressed, we'll certainly have time to answer as much questions as we can, and whatever we cannot, we'll try to follow up as expeditiously as possible. So just going in right into the first page, we are showing the table is showing the summary of kind of where we started and where we are currently at. So we see the second column, which shows the BOT budget workshop figures, which were presented to you in the beginning of the month. And the next two columns after that shows some of the additions and the reductions or eliminations um, to arrive at the post-workshop figures of $35.1 million that we are currently looking at right now. And the last column basically shows the overall variance from where we started and where we currently stand. It's just a combination of the additions and the eliminations that we're seeing. So we'll definitely be going into each line item in more detail, but some of the highlights which I misspelled, so I apologize for that, that I wanted to kind of go into is, we were really kind of faced with three significant areas or challenges. So the first one is definitely the state of Hawaii General Fund. Although the BOT workshop numbers does reflect the reductions, a day before the workshop, we were notified by the state that our general fund appropriation is going to be at about just over $3 million, which would be about $1.5 million reduction from the $4.5 million that we had requested for per year. That $1.5 million reduction consisted of about $850,000 in personnel, as you can see, and the remaining was related to $630,000. So based on the discussion that we've had with the board at the first workshop, our goal was to go back and reassess the personnel figures to try to accommodate and address the shortfall of that $853. And specifically regarding the grants, our goal was to essentially identify that money within the trust fund to restore it to the full funding level. And that $630,000 shortfall was specifically related to health, housing, and income focus area. The second item is really from some of the discussions and comments that we've had in the community grants workshop and the first action item, which we'll be revisiting later on today. We've heard a lot of the concerns from the board about some of the processes, some of the criterias, and this isn't going to be responding to all of the concerns, but what we have done is we have set aside and identified a pot of $500,000, and for the time being, we're going to refer to it as Kulia grants. And this is money that we're going to be working with the board to establish a criteria to hopefully fill in some of the gaps that were identified, that our community grants program may not be reaching currently The focus obviously is going to be on, leveraging as much resources as possible with this money, and hopefully filling in some of the smaller capacity or the smaller grants area that we currently are not servicing as much.
So trustees, as John shared, is um, the community grants, which we had the workshop, was for 2-year funding. This is, we're trying to identify funds, and we have for at least 500,000 for this year and then next year for small capacity annual grants. Okay, so we will have to come up with additional criteria and then the timing of how that rolls out. But we are trying to accommodate the concerns that many of you had in terms of providing opportunity for nonprofits who do not have as much experience, and really try to look across the board in terms of statewide parity for each island. And David and Lisa will, in later today's presentation, give an update in terms of our discussions with grants and some um, modifications to reassess the community grants.
Trustee Aduna?
So my question is that 500,000 that you guys are going to release, is going to be a portion of that going to be released to certain islands too, or we're going to have to fight over all of that too again, all over again? Like make sure some come to Kauai.
Right. So what we want to propose is that we're going to develop a process with the trustees on how to evaluate this Kulia grant,
Okay, thank you.
and how to really make those assignments up front as to what locations should have focus for this type of grant.
Will that be discussed at our 1 o'clock meeting?
I don't think we're prepared yet to try and figure that out on that kind of level of detail. We might want to suggest that, I mean, we have to go down this process and help to evaluate that. As we got to get to the details of how that looks.
Trustee Aquino?
Just a question for the team. Are these Kulia grants of 500K for 2 years? Are you proposing 500K over twice?
The feedback we heard from the trustees was to provide a way to have 1 year granting
No, well, I'm
capabilities.
sorry. Well, what I meant is this 500K for 1 year period and then a second year period, another 500K?
Madam Chair, currently the budget that has been identified for this is only for fiscal 18. But based on the board's directive, we don't have the same $500,000 identified for fiscal 19 at this point. But it is something that we can definitely monitor as we go into fiscal 18 to see if there can be savings that can be identified that may be carried over into fiscal 19 with this objective.
Trustee Aquino?
Actually, I wasn't trying to suggest that we continue the practice. I understand this to be a stopgap measure in order to make up for the failure to help certain groups. Do we have a long-range approach to incorporating trustee feedback into the grants process? Are we
Yes.
developing, we're
Yes.
updating that?
Yes.
Trustee Apo?
Yeah, Madam Chair, again, I'd like to repeat, one of my thoughts, which was through this process, what I hope will emerge moving forward is establishing some legacy organizations for continual funding, a continuum of funding, or organizations that basically form the footprint of the Hawaiian community, important organizations that do work in terms of leverage rather than direct services. These are organizations like the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement was here this morning, the Association of Hawaiian Civic Clubs, Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation, which we fund, and that by establishing a core group of what I'm calling legacy organizations, that the predictability of assured funding from year to year, subject to review and how well the deliverables are being delivered. That way, at least it takes the mystery out of moving forward and long-range approaches to building capacity from within the community. And these are organizations that help us that help us address the transgenerational dependency on the government that Hawaiians have been under for so long. And I really believe that by supporting these organizations in a consistent way and establishing a category for these grants would definitely leverage us a lot better. Thank you.
Um, Madam Chair, I just wanted to pose a question on what was the thought of the team that worked on this revisions, and why a biennium approach wasn't utilized with the Kulia grants? Because you're already engaging with the biennium approach, and these grants, we were hopeful that the $500,000 would come out of the existing budget, but not only limited to year one, but would include year two. So what was the rationale behind, or the thought behind?
It
Because
was
I know the other option is the realignment, yeah.
right.
Whenever you conduct realignment, there could be for the 2019 approach to consider the $500,000 to be restored in the grants for the Kulia grants that we're asking for.
Right. Madam Chair, it was, for us, it was really a process of identifying how much reduction can be identified from each of the fiscal 18 and 19 given the current circumstances, and how much money could be reallocated for the priority areas that were mentioned by both the trustees and the communities. That's what really guided the process. And unfortunately, for fiscal 19, because there were other items that as we'll get into more discussion, personnel as an example, we are using a higher fringe rate in anticipation for a potential increase from compared to fiscal 18. So that posed as one of the constraints in identifying some of the money. So the intent of this, Kulia grants was to at least identify some monies for some of the gap areas to be hopefully addressed. And although the funding is only for fiscal 18, the grant agreement structure can be structured so that it can move into fiscal 19 service period as well. And that would allow both the administration and BOT sufficient amount of time to really, think through some of the criterias and evaluation areas that will address some of the concerns. So that was really the intent behind creating this resource available for further discussions to be held into fiscal 18.
Yeah, I wanted to add, I was looking over September 28, 2016. This is when Colette Machado was the chair of IM, and Spire did a workshop for us. I was just going back and looking at stuff to figure out how we're going to do this. So I agree with Peter. We should have that legacy thing where they don't have to keep justifying every year, but we have to evaluate the scenario that they give, analysis. We must evaluate the expected value of the proposed investment or expenditure, because they kind of take it for granted every year. And I think that's been missing, because I've been here, 3 years now. I haven't seen them come back and say, this is what we did, this is how many people came to our Kikihula. Anyway, that's my thoughts. Thanks.
Yes. Yes. I'll just, Trustee Aloysius and then Trustee Machado's next. First is when we started out in 2010, there were legacy appropriations for community organizations. However, because we were transitioning to the new strategic plan, we were trying to align all of these grants to how do they connect up to our strategic plan and our results. I probably say it took 2 years trying to educate people on the new direction we are going. And so your point that you're making, and so does Trustee Apo, is we have to assure this new criteria that when we award the legacy grantees, that it is connected to our strategic plan and result, and that there's a reporting back process. So for the community grants, our program improvement does that as well. As the grants people also do checks as well. But we have to be very clear in terms of we always talked about the return on investment and the impact that we can document we're making or having on the community. So the process that Lisa is talking about, working with the board, we had previous criteria. We may need to look at that and then update that or revise for, again, who is who is identified to be a legacy, because we had different types of legacies. We had Kegi Hula, we had, this festival, that festival, this conference. So putting it together and having it sort of organized would be much more beneficial and brings greater clarity for the board as well as direction for administration.
value
Right,
to OHA.
right, right. The second comment regarding Trustee Machado is is that for the past months we've been discussing coming out of the ledge the challenges we have had, the feedback from not only the legislature but from community feedback is how we can be much more streamlined in providing greater services to the community, um, which is through our major part is through our grants program, but we provide additional funding through contracts, through other sponsorships. But over the past 2 months, we've been having discussions with the board and ourselves on how do we make that where we put more money out to the community, streamline staff as well. So that's sort of the intent. Um, our other direction was that given the shortfall of the general funds was to restore that and make it up so that we get back up to the 6 million for the community grants, which we did. And in addition to that, we were able to do further reductions to identify this additional pot of $500,000. So that's sort of in addition to John Kim's rationale, what we're trying to balance again with feedback from community and the board on how to make that happen, and proceed sort of cautiously in terms of making sure we have a good process, good criteria, input from you, so that we can actually roll it out. The Kulia Grants program, actually, we had that before, but because we went to 2-year funding, and the 2-year funding rationale, which is a best practice across many grantees, is multi-year funding provides that opportunity to attain the kind of results we want. But I think our challenge as a Hawaiian institution across statewide is, and it was brought up in the discussion, how do we make our funding go further throughout our community where we can provide multiple organizations who serve our community, um, and get the greatest value for the funding that we're offering them to get the results we want. So that's what we're looking at currently in strengthening criteria with David's team and Lisa to see how we can spread the wealth in terms of the number of grantees and the funding amount. So, yeah, and so they'll give an update to where we
Trustee
are at
Apo.
with that process.
Madam Chair, I agree with Kamino on what he's saying. I think what's needed is an overall overarching strategy. I totally agree that we need to make sure that we continue to be connected to the strategic plan. So with respect to legacy organizations, perhaps we need to add a strategic objective. Uh, the notion that part of our mission, a huge part of our mission, is empowering the community capacity through organizations that are already form an institutional footprint across Hawaii that are delivering services to the people, so that more than them having to come beg for money every year at the door, we're establishing with the Legacy Grants partnerships. We are partners. And as partners, we're helping to provide them with resources which to carry out the mission. That would be a tremendous way to leverage our money in a consistent, predictable way and empower Hawaiians to take care of themselves. Otherwise, we continue down this road of and I know you folks understand what I'm saying. So, thank you.
I got a couple questions. Because the current review that we're engaged in doesn't allow for, if it's the will of the trustees at the board level, from the RM committee to reduce the spending policy by 4.5%, from 5 to 4.5%, which is 0.5%
Right.
reduction, which is equivalent to 1.5 million.
About
If we are to
1.75.
decide that after this budget is passed, effective after two readings at the board level, where would this money come from to overall reduce the spending policy?
So, Madam Chair, we're partially addressing that potential reduction, at least for fiscal 18. And for fiscal 19, it's something that we would definitely have to go back because we don't have $1.75 million of reduction identified at the moment. But this would be actually the third item under the highlight, which points to just over $1 million of reduction, is the last part of for fiscal 18. The amounts that has been restored or reduced. So in addition to taking care of the personnel reduction, restoring the grants, and establishing the Kulia grants, the administration was able to also accumulate and identify an additional reduction of just over $1 million, at least for fiscal 18. So this amount is not quite at the 0.5% reduction, but this would effectively, as it currently stands, reduce the spending limit to approximately 4.7% from the 5% that the current policy states.
Oh, John, where's the 500,000 for the audit?
The $500,000 for the audit can be allocated from this budget reduction. Part of the reason why we were hesitant to put that into the contract balance at the moment is because it's still going through an active RFQ process where the amount really for the budget should be determined based on the final scope of the project, and just having that amount publicly aware can come into play when the proposals are being received during the RFQ process as well.
Well, we've been talking about it on the table, so it's not really a secret. And I know I shared with you folks that we don't want this money to come out of fiscal reserve. So we asked that it be built into this to this budget.
Right, Chair. So we heard you, and we do have areas where we can make up that for that amount.
What would have been helpful in this workshop is that where you list the reductions, you should have listed the same thing that you did the week before, so that our trustees could see where the reductions are on the different charts. You speak about it, but we don't see it in print.
Mhm.
But John,
That
this will come up when we get finally ready to take action, right? This is just to facilitate questions that was raised and to hear from the committee, right?
Correct.
But you're gonna do the tables
So
eventually when it comes out for final decision making, right? I'm hopeful.
Yes. So, Madam Chair, we're also currently actively working on the action item for the biennium budget. So the biennium budget does have a lot more detailed tables that will reflect whatever comes out of this budget workshop today. For the purpose of today's workshop, this was something that administration was actively working to finalize the figures as of yesterday afternoon. So we just wanted to be able to at least provide a high level of some of the significant changes that has been made since then for the purpose of the budget workshop and discussion.
Madam Chair, one more question.
yes.
This relates to contracts. This is the last item on the reduction and adjustments, which relates to the TCP edits for Kukani Local Preservation Plan implementation. Um, I think it was 2 weeks ago, I went out because I had a call from Waianae beneficiary, Glenn Keeler, who's a lineal descendant. And we met out there with Jonathan. And one of the key questions that was asked was, what is the status of the TCP? Because it's still in draft form. It's going on to year 3 now. And what Jonathan expressed to Mr. Keeler was that they need to be making few edits from Ross Cordy's original work and confirming some of his identification of these lineal practitioners. And in the way you have it listed, it's going to be eliminated this year. And this will set it back even further for another year. And I'm not sure what the next steps are. Now, if the beneficiaries, like Tom Lishenko, Alika, forget his last name, and Mr. Keela, if they knew this was going to occur, we would be stormed today because 3 years is a little bit too long. And if we're going to wait another year, it'll be 4 years to complete a project that is critical to the ongoing work that's being planned for the planning, the preservation plan, which we're already engaging with services already. And your committee has been identified. So I'm just raising that. Where's Miles? Stand up, Miles. Let's go. Advocate for your team. Am I wrong? Am I incorrect? That we need to be doing these edits. If not, it'll go on to another 4 years. I sat there with one angry practitioner, Mr. Keela.
Yes.
And he felt that the TCP, because they couldn't get it at the state office of Shopo, he thought they had a copy because he's trying to trace whether or not his genealogy is included, his papa's genealogy. And Jonathan was clear that this is why they were looking at the edits from the original TCP. So I'm just making noise now.
Yeah, so I'll respond. So actually, the review went out, there's an independent review that went out in terms of the validity, credibility, authenticity of Roscordy's work.
Exactly.
And it specifically pertained to genealogies.
Yeah.
Not just only genealogies, but potential families who may have either a lineal descendant connection or a cultural descendant connection to Kukaniloko. In the review of that work by an independent group, there are some serious concerns that do not match up with other scholarly work. So the recommendation went back to Mr. Cordy that he would incorporate, consider to revise his work or findings of scholarship, and we've been actually waiting on him, not our staff. So the reason why that's important, as you shared, Trustee, is because certain practitioners do believe that some of that is very relevant to stewardship of the land,
Yes.
which I think we all agree. However, if the genealogies are in question by other noted Hawaiian scholars, then that's something that we have to reconcile with the kind of people we contract and the work that they do. So I think right now the responsibility, given the recommendations by this independent group to Mr. Cordy, which we believe is very valid, in order to complete the TCP, he would need to reconsider his research and his work that either aligns or does not align with other Native Hawaiian scholars like Mackenzie
Right.
and others, and Kamakau and so forth. So that's more of us. I would say I wouldn't say so much of a technical, but it's a very legitimate feedback to a report that if OHA supports, and to have community partnerships with people like Glenn Keela and Tony, Tom Leshenko, that we have a body of work that has great cultural value and validity that we can rely on.
The difference between Tom Linchenko and these two individuals, Alika Silva and Glenn Keela, is that is the connection on the Wa'anai west side
Yeah.
with the Kukani locals.
Yes.
So they're very anxious to see
Yeah.
the depth of the coverage. But I also found out that the cost of the edits was only $25,000, which is not a huge amount to complete something as important as this.
And that's correct, Trustee. But I guess what I'm sharing is we are not holding up a publication of the TCP,
No, you're not.
and it really is up Mr. Cordy to make his corrections. But that TCP is of great value, but also in addition to the master planning and the community outreach planning, those are also very significant processes that will also help to shape and develop Kukani Loko, not just the Wahikapu, the sacred sites, but also our agricultural parcels, in addition to a cultural.
I just wanted to raise my concern that another year would just be a little bit too
Right.
long, and if we would try to see how we could advance. I know that Dr. Ching actually offered ethnographic kind of
Correct.
testimony that they would be working with our in-house archaeologists
Right.
to start documenting. So all of those things are positive, but it only is going to lend to an attachment to the full report.
Correct.
It's the report that you want to make it
Right.
error-free. So I appreciate your manao, and I won't say anything more now. Okay, mahalo.
In following up on that, going back to how administration is looking at trying to accommodate the potential reduction of 5% to 4.5 for spending policy. We know that there are certain contracts and programs that are much higher than others, and I'm not picking on land, but they have some very high projects that have been on the table for a while. Not just for Kakakamakai, but Kukaniloko is a big one. And I spoke with Trustee Hulu. We do have our eyes on those as potential ones we would need to consider having a discussion with Miles and his team. Could we delay that out further beyond fiscal year 2019? Or could we create another opportunity with those who are in office um, to help us with our challenges with water, infrastructure, and agricultural development out there? So we have contracts out for those types of projects.
Who back the pipes?
Well, that Miles heard you.
Trustee Aquino?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd like to address the fact that some of the trustees have brought up additional costs that you had not factored in originally to the budget. And of course, we have to deal with the loss of funds from the legislature and so forth. You'll recall that back in November 29th, I presented to the board my crucial recommendations for achieving fiscal sustainability. And it did look at the fact that Spire had pointed out that we'd been spending excessively from the Native Hawaiian Trust Fund, and it did recommend that we reduce from 5% to 4.5%. One of those recommendations was to look at ways revenues could be increased. And so I wanted to just ask you if you have taken a further look and what you anticipate our increasing of revenues could be.
Madam Chair, as part of our process and part of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs has not been really, positioning projects for economic development. And I think that is a skill set that we are trying to build in the next 2 years. And so knowing that that's where my skill set comes from, I think we've been trying to come up with these projects for economic stability. Um, since then, right, we have pushed really hard on our commercial. All the assets that OHA has actually has been pushed to its limit, its current limit, without future investment, um, to create revenue, to develop that. I think putting that focus on the operation, Kapohana has been very clear that in Inspire's report, 4.5% is an aspiration, but 1% revenue increase would actually create more value in the long term. And I think that's what we have to develop internally, and we expect to.
So as a follow-up, Trustee Aquino, is that we we we've we have looked at potential projects uh, that that could move us forward in the short term. Short term meaning one to 2 3 years. It'll take an investment. We're not looking at large investment, say like Hawaii direct investment. We're looking at, in the range of $200,000, $300,000 to kind of get us off the ground, which we've put together business plan and performance. Um, and our rationale was that if we were to continue to support community capacity and funding opportunities with the LLCs to make them sustainable rather than drawing down from our core operating budget and trust funds, that that we look at a business opportunity for them so that they can also distribute funds and grants out to the community. That's one. Internally, we are looking at several projects that could be of great value, uh, which would um, which would highlight or build upon our asset of culture, technology, and knowledge. Right now, we are not at the point where we can share that with the board at this time. But I think with several months, we can. We put in some monies to do that, and if the analysis comes back from Spire, which we believe is very hopeful, um, that I think there's something that we should seriously consider as administration that would, with the minimal investment, will provide a high return. Um, but it's going to take manpower. It's going to take some progressive movement and partnerships to actualize that. That's sort of on the is on the micro, meaning really down here in the administration. But I think we started the community outreach for Kakakomakai, and the potential not only which is expected to grow from our current revenue that we receive from the leases, but then that would be a mid to long range plan in addition to the public land trust that we passed the resolution in negotiations with the governor and the legislative leadership. So those are more ones we've actually planned for the past 4 years, 5 years, that we are at that point where we can, but again, despite all the research we do, it's going to take political will to really get some cooperation for that.
Trustee Aquino?
Thank you very much for that response. I know that you have been looking at some revenue generating options because at our last meeting we discussed the Kaka'ako Makai revenues going for the next couple of years to legacy lands. I'm wondering a couple of things. One, whether in light of the cuts that are necessary or even achieving a reduction to 4.5% of spending of the Native Hawaiian Trust Fund, would you reconsider whether that Kaka'ako Makai money should go to the legacy lands or go to some of these more immediate expenses? That's one question. And the second is whether you have a ballpark figure with regard to expected revenues. I know back in November I had pointed out that we could offset the loss with a $4.8 million revenue increase. Now that figure obviously it was based upon information available at that time. So those are just a couple of questions. First, about whether you'd review Kaka'ako Makai monies for legacy lands, and secondly, whether you have a ballpark projection as to what kind of revenues we could go after.
Thank you, Trustee Akita. I will ask Miles because it was a strategy that we're thinking to help more operationally to help support the funding for legacy lands to our commercial properties, which was part of previous audit, but then also kind of his expertise in terms of how we look at financial sustainability of Kakapo.
Aloha Chair, Trustees. If I can first explain that the Kakakumakai income right now is governed by the spending policy that only allocates 10% toward grants. 90% of the income is basically retained for exclusive use by Kakakumakai for planning, development, etc. What we were proposing, and for our legacy lands, including Kukane Loco, those costs come out of the core operating budget. So what we were proposing was, instead of allowing the money to just sit dedicated to Kakako Makai, that we take some of that money and we apply it toward our legacy lands, which would actually replace the funding that is coming out of the core budget. So it does have a direct benefit as far as our spending of the funds from the Native Hawaiian Trust. Um, the percentage that we picked, I think that we had several trustees question, how did we get 30%? That is an arbitrary amount. So that can be higher, that can be lower. Um, we just felt that we were comfortable with the idea of 10% going to grants, 30% going toward our legacy lands, which is a substantial amount and in keeping with the recommendations from the state auditor. But it would leave 60% still, which is a substantial amount for the planning and development of Kaka'ako Makai.
So you could negotiate that 30% a bit in terms of your trying to make the budget work. Okay, thank you for that answer.
Lisa?
Madam Chair, thank you. I just wanted to add that from the mechanics of our proposal, it's typical that you would put something with a negative ROI with something with a positive ROI. So your effect on its value, right, becomes something you pour back in to the legacy property. And so legacy properties always struggle with a positive ROI, right? And so we're trying to, through the master plan, turn that around. But until then, you have this situation. So that's where the proposal came from. That's what its intent was, is to help the trustees understand that we need to make this balance, the shift. I hope that's helpful.
Miles. In the Starbolton front page article on the Kakakumakai update, Malia Ka'aihui, our consultant, indicated that we generate over $5 million from the current leases being held by OHA at those parcels in Kaka'ako. Can you confirm that or deny that?
5 million is a little bit high. I think that for fiscal,
But that's what's represented in the paper, what's front page.
they might have rounded up. I think that
So what is the actual number?
it's more closer to 4.8 million for fiscal 17. Our current projection is 4.3 million. So I think they just rounded it up to the 5 million.
So with regards to amending the current policy, we're waiting on staff to make some revisions and clean up the original referral from the RM chair to the BOT. So as soon as that's ready, we can then take a position on that. Because according to the chair, and the purpose of the action item was to bring to closure a sunset on those dates, of the revenue.
Pardon?
They know what I'm talking about because we will defer the referral to the board for approval. I took it off the agenda, and that was the one to constitute an action item that would amend what they call. What is the words you use, Paul, on the action? What was it called? The Kaka'ako policy. What? Yeah, that's the word.
We would limit it to the 30% to 2 years only.
But I spoke with the chair to hold it because administration needed to revise and clean up the actual action and really look into where the source of the funding was coming from. So when that's ready, we'll bring it back to the BOT for consideration.
And it should
And
be
then
ready
we can
shortly.
we could move forward on that.
We're moving forward as quickly as we can.
Okay. I just wanted to give us some comfort level because we are talking about Kaka'ako.
Can I just add something about Kaka'ako? In the presentation, the PowerPoint, Malia mentioned that OHA was going to make 15.8 million a year on the build out of Kaka'ako Makai, and I thought that was a very premature statement because the trustees haven't made that decision yet that we were going to only lease out, which is what was presented in the presentation. I was there at Kaka'ako, and to make that statement that we were only going to lease out the lands and not be part of the development was not accurate. So I don't know how many more presentations we have, a couple more, I think, but that's not an accurate statement. The trustees haven't even gotten there to make that decision. So maybe that can be corrected. I got beneficiaries climbing on me last night in Maui, arguing about why we're making only 15.8 with such high valued property. And I didn't quite know what they were talking about until they pointed out that that was on the presentation. Well, that shouldn't have been on the presentation. Just wanted to say that. Trustee Lindsay.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. You know, I want to rewind back to Trustee Ahuna's earlier question, and I think it was a resource allocation question. My question is, and I'm only asking it just so I heard you correctly, Lisa, that the process to determine that is kind of a work in progress still?
So, Madam Chair, I think you're referring to, Trustee Lindsay, you're referring to the Kulia granting?
Yes.
Yes, yes. And so it's kind of, we still should develop it together with the board. We haven't decided. We really try not to influence, you know, that, with exception of being competitive process. So we want to develop that with the board as to how we want to work this Julio grants. It's meant to be responsive, for the board to be able to be responsive, and that's really the only intent.
Okay, and then I have one more question, please. You know, we saw this past legislature a reduction in our funding support from the ledge. Our portfolio is kind of iffy. I mean, you know, we're still doing okay, but we're, I think, marching into some tough times ahead of us. My question is, at the federal level, you know, the chances of our education support and our support for health, there's a good possibility that we will be facing federal cutbacks as well. Do we have any strategies in place? Because I know that as folks were climbing on Trustee Lindsay on Maui last night over Kaka'ako, I think at some point in the future, our beneficiaries will be banging on our door because of reductions at the federal level. So are we, I mean, we're dealing with cutbacks at state level and having a tough time. And I guess, you know, the future for us is going to mean further trimming of our lamp. The concern is, are we prepared for that possibility?
I'll respond. Thank you, Trustee Lindsay. For the past 4 years, OHA, has been working closely in supporting the Native Hawaiian Healthcare Reauthorization, which is coming up 2018-19 for further funding. So right now, their funding is pretty much set for the federal level. So the strategy around that is not just relying on that, which that money goes to Papa'ololokai to fund the Native Hawaiian healthcare system statewide. So that would be one area that is very critical. But OHA participates in a Native Hawaiian health consortium of many other providers, as well as networks with HMSA's, John A. Bird School of Medicine, Department of Native Hawaiian Health, community health centers. And we are looking to provide a greater network of Hawaiian healthcare providers to kind of not just support Papa'ololokai, but to actually have, in a way, kind of what Trustee Apo has been talking about. I know we've talked about, you know, maybe Queens taking a step forward, but we're looking at where a community of providers really address Native Hawaiian health with our minimal participation. Um, our contribution to that is financially is quite minimal in terms of supporting some small gatherings and so forth. But our greatest asset really is our public policy at the state level, as well as at the federal level. So that's for health. So we know that strategy is working and moving forward is because Sherry Daniels, the new executive director for Papa'ololokai, has been able to solidify the federal government's commitment for the funding for the next 2 years. The reauthorization will be another one that we're going to have to ramp up to defend. Unfortunately, it's not as looking well for the Native Hawaiian Education Act in terms of the 30 million plus that the Trump administration is looking to eliminate significantly, or if not in its entirety. They have a Native Hawaiian Education Council that takes the lead on advocating for that. Um, I believe our Washington, D.C. Bureau has been working with our Hawaii delegation. The one person that is key is Senator Schatz, who still has some position within the um, Bureau of Indian Affairs, or he has some position that he can continue to advocate for us for the ongoing funding for that. Our reports have gotten back that it's going to be very, very challenging to sustain that. It seems that the president has a target on the Native Hawaiian Education Council fund. We knew that was on the sort of table for removal, but now it's coming a reality. Um, what we do know about that funding, it's gone to different, people, whether at the university, you had some community people have received those fundings. But I think we would need to, meaning the Hawaiian Community Education Network, we'll have to reconsider um, what that gap would mean if those funds do not matriculate down, and what services would be at jeopardy. We don't have a clear idea. I know a lot of it went to scholarships. Um, our funding for charter schools is a line item now. I think the proposal we sent in 2 years ago to look at the per pupil funding, which federal monies are given to the state, and then the state allocates that monies. We're looking at the study, which hopefully we get results this year, to have a clear idea of how much funding will go, not just for per pupil funding for students in Native Hawaiian charter schools, but also CIP funding. So that's a advocacy role that we fulfill, um, but it also helps in terms of supporting the financial sustainability of all of these Hawaiian school networks. So that's sort of been the strategy. Um, as for us internally, I think we're trying to do as much as we can to maintain the granting level, which is 6 million, in addition to Native Hawaiian chartered schools, in addition to the 500 annual scholarships we provide, which is 1 million in 2 years. Uh, so I think we haven't decreased our financial commitment and program grant funding to the community. We've always maintained it. And I think in the future, we would really need to focus on what Trustee Aquino is saying is our fiscal sustainability plan in terms of a much more consistent focus in those strategies that will help increase the revenue, but probably a much more clearer idea on the action plan to actually get there. So for example, like Kakakamakai, whether or not we really are considering 2020-21 to really begin construction, which would mean we would need to decide on the master plan decision a year or two earlier so that we can actually procure someone, and then what that potential revenue would look like given current entitlements, and if not, then looking at extended entitlements from the legislature. Um, the public land trust, I think, is a board matter. Need to consider in terms of the leadership of working with the governor and the legislative, the president from the the Senate, as well as the House Speaker from the House. I think with the current changes there in the House, there may be some movement potential to support our public land trust negotiations. I think we are in a very good position, trustees, because of the research and the data that we have provided. It'll be difficult for, I believe, state agencies to counter our argument in terms of the totality of trust funds being taken in as revenue for the state and what really 20% is. And so, but, again, it's contingent upon political will, at the legislature now. And then how much the board, we want to really kind of not just pursue that, but have a much more concerted effort beyond those in the leadership role, more on the exterior to help gain greater support for that.
Thank you.
You wanna?
Sure. I believe we were still on item number 2 on the highlights. So we discussed a little bit about the Kulia grants. And so the budget reduction that we have identified in addition to that is about $1.024 million. So overall, from the time when we had last discussed the budget to the numbers that we have now, we have either restored or reduced a total of $3 million for fiscal 18 uh, fiscal year. So, uh, along with some of the discussions that we've had before, I think this is in direction to prepare for a potential reduction in our spending limit from, the board considering a reduction from 5 to 4.5%. And I think, as Miles has also shared, Kakakumakai spending policy revision is something that is also would be kind of in the same line in helping with this direction by alleviating some of the legacy land operating costs to be paid from Kakakumakai's revenue, which again was also in line with one of the recommendations made by the Office of the Auditors 4 years ago when they conducted their last audit.
So, John, based on what I asked you folks to come up with, what is the 1 million earmarked for? Because it doesn't cover some of the stuff.
Currently, it is not designated for any particular item. So, it's something that can, depend if the spending policy change, it can certainly kind of be used towards making that reduction from the 5 to 4.5%, or, if other needs arise during the year, is something that can be allocated for other budgetary purposes.
We
But
need to see the audit money in the budget. We need to see it there. So it should go under your contracts. Yeah. We need to see that 500,000 there, not in the air. And then I have one question.
yes.
And Chair, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we had $80,000 in the Chair's budget for financial analysts,
Yes.
and an additional 120 for the real estate financial analyst.
Uh-huh.
But it's not showing that here.
Madam Chair, the $120,000 for the real estate financial advisor is
Kakako.
sitting under Kakakumakai's
Okay.
budget. So
Okay.
it's not shown under this because this is only showing the core, but it is budgeted for both fiscal 18 and 19.
Okay.
So the RM financial analyst budget, which had an increase of $30,000, which I'll shortly go over, is sitting under as part of the core operating budget. So if you would allow me, I can just go into a little
Sure.
more variances on each of the line items.
Question.
Yes, quick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to follow up to Madam Chair's question, John, She was asking about where the audit fund would be placed. Where would that be on this chart?
Contracts.
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 Yes.
Is it
It's not here, but he'll put it in.
okay? You'll put it into section C, contracts.
Right. So if we were to make that adjustment, you would essentially see an increase in our overall contracts budget by 500,000 from the $5.685 million that you're currently seeing under that line item. So that will be the expected change that will be shown at the action item.
You'll come back with the 500K in
Correct.
the budget.
And
Thank
it
you.
would also reduce this budget reduction of $1,024,000 by 500,000
Yeah.
because that's where it would be coming from.
Here for the final decision.
Thank you, Chair.
That's where it'll take us. This is just input.
Understood.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
In talking with Apohana last night, I did suggest that administration provide a list of the contracts that's proposed in the next year and two, based on the figure that's in our budget. The trustees want to know where that money going to be spent. What kind of contracts are we talking about? So if that could also be made available to the trustees, that would be helpful.
Then we need to look at the level of contracts. Is it gonna be 100,000? Because some of the contracts varies to 10 to 25. Are we looking at the higher ones at 100,000? A little less at 50? What the range would be?
I just wanted to know where that figure came from in the budget, the $5 million. That's a big, big figure. So I wanted to know what are we going to pay out with that kind of money.
And also, Madam Chair, please also keep in mind that out of the $5.6 million that we see in contracts, nearly $2 million of that is allocated for our legal and social services provisos.
Oh.
So again, because of the requirements that are specifically put in the budget bill, it does require a 103D procurement to be conducted for the procurement of that services. But so it's 5.6 is inclusive of that $2 million for which the services are provided directly to the beneficiaries and not to OHA.
Thank you.
Chair. So we'll quickly just go into the first line on the
What page
core
are we
operating
on?
budget. We're still on the first page, so we're going into the variance
Thank you.
explanation. So I'll
Okay.
just go over some of the factors that went into making the change between the budget workshop number one figure into the current number now. So really for personnel, the primary reason factor for the reduction is in the fringe rate. So as you may recall, going into this budget, we were budgeting the fringe rate at 60%. This was consistent with the state's direction that they received from the Budget and Finance. So we were also recommended and directed to budget at 60% going in. Now, based on the current effective rate, which is still at 49.54%, and based on some of the recent conversation that we've had with the Ways and Means Committee's office, our understanding is that the negotiation between the Fed and the state in determining the increase in the fringe rate and the timing of when it's going to be implemented is still up in the air. It's not something that's known at the time. So based on that understanding, we have decided to recalculate our personnel needs at 52%. Now, 52% is still, 2.5% higher than our current effective rate. So unless the rate changes between now and end of the year, we'll start the year with, some savings accumulating, throughout the year. And we're hopeful that, by the time, if the fringe rate is going to be increased sometime during the year, this 52% calculation is going to help us supplement some of the increases that may happen during the year. So definitely it's something more of a lesson learned from the experience that we went through during the current biennium. So we do feel that we are going to be better prepared, and we'll be reaching out to different agencies to obtain updates and information on a periodic basis. So we're better prepared for it. We also have the 9 FTE position continue to be frozen for fiscal 18 and 19. So that's also part of the reduction that helped us get to this balanced budget for the personnel. Moving on to the programs is relatively one of the smaller budget area. There's really just one addition, and it was an increase in the advertising budget for the Keiki Hula Festival. It has been restored to 25,000, and that was based on one of the comments that we have received from the previous, workshop. And similarly, the reduction that you see for 105,000 in fiscal 18, that's a result of some of the conferences, meetings, and events being eliminated, namely a Steward Development Conference and Polynesian Leaders Group Meeting Conference. Those have been eliminated. And across the board for the remaining conferences and meetings, we have taken a 25% reduction across the board. So, it will really be up to the programs, excuse me, and the PIAs to revisit those areas and reprioritize on which events and conferences that OHA will be participating based on, our work plans and the focus area for the next biennium. Moving on to the contracts. For additions, there is an addition of $30,000 for the RM financial analyst. This would bring the total for that line item up to $80,000 per year. This is actually in line with what we have budgeted and actually spent on this line item for past few years. And this is the consulting financial analyst service that has been provided in the past few years by Spire. There's a small $25,000 addition for EVPO anthropologist and archaeologist report that's also being added. Moving down to the reduction, there is a deferral of $100,000 for well planning entitlement and $50,000 for archaeological inventory assessments. Both are for Kukani local legacy properties, and this is a deferral into fiscal 19. So it's reducing the fiscal 19-18 budget, but it will be shown as an addition in the fiscal 19. However, what we're trying to do is based on our resources that are available. We're trying to prioritize and defer and phase out some of the projects so that we can make the best use of the constraints that we have with the budget. And what this would do is that whatever we have planned for subsequent to this phase in fiscal 19 is now likely going to be pushed into the next biennium. The next item, elimination of some of the advocacy budget requests, including International Advocacy Fellow, Water Working Group Consultant, and Hawaiian Language Capacity Booklet on state and county names. And lastly, a reduction and elimination in various legacy and facility-related contracts that totals about 200. Some of the work includes TCP edit that we have discussed earlier, Kukani Local Preservation Plan implementation, interim management implementation, and other unforeseen expenses and various legacy and facility needs. So I believe for almost all of the items, it's not a total elimination, but a reduction from what was originally requested. So they will be continuing to do this work during the year. It's not something that's going to be completely stopped. Moving on to the grants. Grants is an area that had a lot of different movements. But starting with the request, we've talked about the restoration of the $630,570 in general fund reduction, specifically in the areas of health, housing, and income. So for all three of these areas, we are now budgeting for the full $500,000 for each of the focus areas that the board had initially approved back in August of 2016. Also, as we discussed earlier, we have allocated $500,000 for the Kulia grants, for which the grant criteria will be established and solicited during fiscal year 2018. Also, spending or addressing some of the concerns about the legacy sponsorship, all those smaller items. We have allocated $10,000 for Prince Hula Festival and also for $20,000 for the Living Treasures event sponsorship. Now, some of the reductions, we have a 239,000 reduction in leveraging grants. That will still leave $250,000 for leveraging grants opportunities. Also, we had some reallocation of education grants, $230, which was moved towards making up some of the deficit for the health, housing, and income deficit. Now, there's no impact to our education community grants, higher education scholarship, or charter school funding. This is something that at the time of the request, there was a sort of a double counting in the request that was received, and while we were going through our review process and fine-tuning the budget, we did identify that this was a double counted figure, so that was simply redirected to fill in some of the deficits that were known. And lastly, there is a $1 million reduction in the annual $3 million DHHL level 2 commitment. So we'll be budgeting $2 million instead of $3 million in 2018. And I can go into this a little bit. So this really kind of goes into our current fiscal year 2017. And it's not something that we've been working on in the past month, but it's something that we have been working on for past several years. We have been making a lot of efforts to have a better monitoring of our spending and our contract monitoring. So part of what executive team did is meet with all the PIAs and programs to identify their cash needs for the remainder of the year, whether it be a check request or contract payments, other PRs that are currently ongoing. Based on our analysis, we were able to identify approximately about $1 million of surplus in fiscal 17's remaining monies that could be encumbered towards the DHHL contract. So essentially what it would allow us to do is we'll be encumbering $4 million instead of the $3 million using fiscal 17 funds, which would allow the savings to carry over into 18, and we would only need to budget for $2 million in fiscal 18. So overall, we're still budgeting for the commitment, the annual $3 million commitment that we have for both fiscal 17 and 18, but this is just a mechanism that would allow us to free up or reduce the fiscal 18 budget and allow this money to be reallocated for different purposes.
I have a question.
Yes.
I thought the unexpended amount of money is going to a fiscal reserve.
It does. So
Are you suggesting this whole fiscal reserve be spent this way?
What we're recommending is part of the unexpended money to be encumbered towards DHHL, which would allow us to reallocate that or carry over that savings into fiscal 18. And we do still anticipate having unspent money at the end of fiscal 17, and those unspent monies will go into our fiscal reserve balance per our fiscal reserve spending policy.
And what is that balance?
We won't know for sure until towards the end of the year.
It was 2 million something, right? And this will be added to it only up to 3 million? The last time you talked with us about the balance of our fiscal reserve, it was 2,094,000 something like that.
So our current fiscal reserve balance is at $2,090,000.
Yes.
So the spending policy for fiscal reserve does allow the additions from the lapsed money from the previous year's operations. So fiscal 17 monies, if there are monies that lapse at the end of the year or unspent at the end of the year, those will be added to the fiscal reserve balance. But what the policy also requires is that addition cannot happen until fiscal 17's financial audit is completed and issued. So based on the timing of when that report was issued, It's usually February or March. So at February or March of next year, we anticipate for whatever lapse fund at the end of fiscal 17 to be added to the $2,090,000 balance.
Go ahead, Chair.
I wanted to remind, it sounds just on paper, it's easy to take the DHHL funding and reduce it down to 2 million versus a million. But we do have a contract with them that we have to revisit. I think we have a remaining 20 plus years. So although the intent is to reduce our commitment, but we have to still look at the potential uh, political
Like it.
outcome and strategy we need to apply. And I think that's why admin has utilized the 1 million as a means of gradually reducing it. And then you're going to have beneficiaries of the big end that will request more priority in our overall funding in the community grants. So that's a part of the strategy would be to commit a portion of it to allow for homestead association or homestead directed projects to be utilized in direct servicing rather than using it as a bond. So we still have work to do and to sit down with the DHHL chair and the commission once we come up with a final proposal for their consideration. But just a reminder that we do have a current contract in place. We're looking to amend the contract or terminate it.
And Madam Chair, just to clarify, our budget, so essentially uh, we have, we're allocating $4 million out of fiscal 17 and $2 million of fiscal 18. So we will have the full annual $3 million committed for the purpose. And for budgetary purposes, we're budgeting based on the current contract, and we fully understand that it will be the board's discussion and direction on how to move forward. But for the budgetary purposes, you can be assured that the budget still allows for the full $3 million annual commitment to be fulfilled.
Thank you.
So just to sum up the grants area, basically the full $3 million for our community grants has been restored. We still have the $200,000 for the AHA $500,000 for the higher education scholarships, $1.5 million for the charter school funding. We did have a small reduction in leveraging opportunity, but we still retain $250,000 per year. And the other big item is obviously identifying additional $500,000 for the PULIA grants. And really the remaining areas are relatively small. So travel, there was some reduction, although the amount is small. The reduction was focused on out-of-state travels for the administration. And the last two areas being equipment and overhead, we have $10,000 of reduction in both categories. 10,000 in equipment for workstation replacement budget, and 10,000 for miscellaneous supplies budget. Any questions for
John, I'll ask you again to please separate the travel budget between the administration and the BOT.
Yes.
Yeah, so we
So
can see.
we're preparing that as part of the action items. So one of the tables for travel will separate out the travel budget by each PIA. So not only between BOT and the administration, but BOT executive, all the rest of the PIAs, and it also show the separation between in-state, out-of-state, and non-employee travels.
It's
So
good.
we'll have that information out for your review.
Okay, thank you.
So just as a follow-up, just in, a, in addition to my 25% reduction just of administration travel, we made further reduction beyond that as well. So I don't know what the total will be, but we kind of scrubbed down as much as we could,
Yeah.
especially out-of-state travel.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Madam Chair, this $410,000 that of travel budget that we're looking at is a reduction from our current year budget of approximately 600 plus $1,000. So it is a significant reduction. And if the board recalls, that $600,000 was also $600,000 budget was also a 20% reduction from the biennium previous to that. So I think OHA as an agency made a lot of effort to take a closer look at our travel budget. So it has gone down in past 5 years from probably something that was closer to $800,000 to nearly half that amount that we're budgeting for fiscal 18 and
So
19.
did you take down the non-employee travel only to encompass the Papahanao Mokuakea accommodations?
Uh, yes. So the big portion, good portion of it was related to Polynesian Leaders Group, and that was something that the board has had comments on. So
But in the
the
second
conference
year,
and the trip, yes,
in the second year, you folks had like $70,000 for non-employee,
yes,
and it should come down to the first year
yes.
number.
So why don't we just go right into the second year?
Okay.
So second year, for the most part, a similar type of additions and reductions were applied. Um, the real main difference, excuse me, let me see if I can. The big difference that you'll see is that in personnel, the savings is not, or reduction is not as much. We actually see an increase of addition of $261,000, but please keep in mind that this number is really net of the 870 or $850,000 of shortfall that we had in our general funds already. So that's accounting, for that. So one different factor that was utilized, I went over that for fiscal 18, we used a fringe rate of 52% for fiscal 18. We are budgeting at a higher fringe rate of 56% for fiscal 19. And that's just in anticipation of the direction that all of the reports and analysis has been kind of pointing to. We don't know how much the increase is going to be or the timing of the increase is going to be, but we want to be as best prepared as we can be while balancing out some of the constraints of the budget in other areas as well. So that's the main difference between 18 and 19 for personnel. Programs has pretty much identical additions and revisions. So we have the restoration of Keiki Hula Festival advertisement to $25,000, and we have reduced Polynesian Leaders Group and Stewardship Development Conference, with the remaining amounts of conference meetings and events having a 25% across the board reduction. And moving on to the contracts, really similar items again, $30,000 addition for the RM financial analyst. And you see the $100,000 that was budgeted for the well planning entitlement, and the $50,000 for the archaeological inventory assessment for Kukali Local. This was something that was deferred from fiscal 18's budget into fiscal 19. So you see it as an addition for fiscal 19. And some of the reductions, there's a small reduction in Oracle consultant services and $25,000 related to Kukuluho Toolkit. Um, some of the larger reductions that are being managed by some of the PIAs, CE, they have elimination or reduction of various contracts that totals to $200,000. Some of the work is related to issue-based education video creation, advertisement, video advertisement, community mobilization, Get Out to Vote initiative, among other things. For advocacy budget, we have reductions in, again, the International Advocacy Fellow, Hawaii Inuiatea Internship Program, as well as the Hawaiian Language Capacity Booklet and state and county names. And finally, the land legacy and facility related contracts that totals to $130,000. Again, similar items reduced as fiscal 18, but not a complete elimination, so they can continue to do the required work. For grants, Again, you see the restoration of the $630,000 for the general funds, as well as the $10,000 for Prince Laula and 20,000 for Living Treasure.
Could you describe the 20,000? That sounds a lot because based on what we're doing this year, it's only $1,000 per recipient, and there's a fee to attend the luncheon or
Mhm.
the event. And hopefully there'll be some monies from those that are buying tables. So 20,000 does sound a lot of money for this one event.
Mhm. So, Madam Chair, for this year being the first year of the event, we're still trying to finalize the logistics of how the event is going to be coordinated. So, my understanding is that some of the proceeds from the sales of the table is going to be returned to OHA to offset the eventual cost. For budgetary purposes, we do budget for the entire cost upfront simply because most of the time, OHA will be the purchasing agency or spending agency that does sort of front the cost. So we need to have the budget in place for us to make the payment. And usually when the money comes back, it'll either be recorded as other revenues, or it can also come back to directly offset the related expenses. So,
I just knew her because you guys never include Lanai and Molokai. So this is just a kind of a opportunity
Sure.
to a little bit. But that's it. I believe next year we'll probably have an opportunity, all islands, to have input to submit names for consideration.
So whose initiative is this?
Yeah. Yes, we addressed that in the last meeting, and I would repeat what I said. This is a policy decision. And I don't have any problem. I think it's a great idea, but how OHA is positioned as the sponsor of this event is something the trustees need to discuss, one. And if OHA remains a primary sponsor of the event, where it is a signature event for us, then the trustees need to be involved in the discussion of the selection process, nomination process, and all of that. So I think they understand
Yeah, I agree.
that's the
Yeah.
direction I think they're anticipating.
Well said, Peter.
So,
Just
so
on the record, that's all. Molokai Lanai was not included.
So, Madam Chair, it's our cultural spirit initiative. We have a cultural working group
Right.
that this came out of. But I agree with Trustee Paul. We need to we should have brought it forward and in election process and nomination of those who are selected. Yeah,
So who comprises this group, the SPRI group?
we have different people within the organization. I believe Dr. Kalani Akana is one, Mehana Hine, and others.
Aloha, Madam Chair.
Aloha.
For this particular event, it actually started out of our cultural specialist, Dr. Klania Kana, had organized a group of cultural experts from across the Pai'aina to come and um, consult on the kind of the state of culture today. And there's a lot of conversations that actually came out of there. One was also our movement on a cultural directory, of a cultural practitioners directory, which is something that we're actively moving on. And this is another initiative that came out of that particular group. Some people, for instance, that's on that group, and I can get you a more comprehensive list, is Sabra Kauka from Kauai, Hokulani Hope Padilla from Maui, Mapuana de Silva from Oahu, Keli Reshao from Maui, um, and, and, and a bunch of others, and Tiviki Holt Takamine, again from Oahu. And the idea of the honoring of kupuna who are still with us today came kind of out of one of those recommendations. Then it was brought to the culture spree, and a culture spree consists of myself, Dr. Akana, Nancy, Nancy King, and then some of our younger staff members, Vahine, um, and Laurie, Kamakana, Aquino, all out of the research department. Um, yeah, and I think that's it from our cultural spree. So we took the recommendations from a kind of a community group that was brought together to discuss matters of culture with our with our culture specialists, and then kind of took it and moved it on to the next level.
Yeah. I think Trustee Apo in the last meeting was mainly saying anything coming out of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs under this name needs to be vetted through the Board of Trustees.
Yes.
And no question, it's a great idea, it's a great initiative, but the board was totally in la la land. We didn't even know what it was about when an email came across our desks asking us if we would buy tables. So we thought, what is this? And it's under the OHA name. So I think Trustee Apo made mention of that in the last meeting. Mahalo for explaining. Oh,
John, if we can wrap up in 5 minutes, so allow discussion or questions from the trustees.
We're actually almost done through.
Yeah,
I don't think we
done.
really need to, unless trustees have any specific questions. Basically for fiscal 19, we have identified and either restored or reduced a total of about $1.5 million. And that's combination of the two areas for it related to state of Hawaii, general fund, and a small budget reduction that remains after restoring and addressing some of the couple of those areas. So with that said, mahalo, Madam Chair and trustees, for allowing us to share this information, and any questions or comments that you have remaining, we'll be here to answer.
Trustee Apo?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I just want to go on record with some comments. First of all, thank you for the presentation. I am enlightened in a good way. Madam Chair, you are in receipt from my staff a list of 10 spending initiatives that I expressed concern about. I just want to speak to three of them. One is the conferences and meetings events. I think the concept is good. I see it more as a relationship building footprint of opportunities. And here again, I believe that the trustees need to be involved in projects such as this, as to if we're going to sponsor these events, it needs to be strategically discussed among the trustees, so that again we get into the leverage question, and that these are decisions, if we choose to support this, that we need to I'm not suggesting that we do that. Well, I mean, at some point we need to get to this. So that's one. The second was the $35,000 for the Mokapu reburial effort. What is that project?
Trustees, our compliance group, in particularly Kai Markel, and I believe Jerome as well, has entered. This has been good, has been a long-standing matter within our community for
The
20
EV
to
is
30
just being
years. Right.
stored. They want to repatriate it.
Right, and so from what we understand through our discussions with Kai is that um, a number of elders from the different families have passed on. However, there is movement amongst the current descendants for to agree for consideration to repatriate. I want to say over 400 iwi kupuna
Right.
back to Mokapu. I believe they're housed currently at the Bishop Museum. Um, we've 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 always had a commitment to the families that OHA would help them rebury it, and so that would include most of the costs in terms of all of the things that will house the EV kupuna to be placed back into the burial. So that's what that fund is for.
Thank you. The last item, thank you, I think the administration is already addressed, which has to do with the Polynesian Leaders Group. So that one was already covered. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Aquino?
Madam Chair, I'd like to just make some quick comments as well. The first is thank you to Kapuhana and our team. You've worked very hard to cut the budget, and I know the challenges you're facing with that, so I appreciate that. Back in this November 2016, when we were considering the new leadership team, I had set forth some criteria that would help me decide on leadership, and that was presented in this document, Crucial Recommendations for Achieving Fiscal Sustainability. There are just three of them I want to mention. The first one we've talked about, and that is to change our current spending and revenue policy. So I hope we're taking very seriously getting down to only a 4.5% draw from the Native Hawaiian Trust Fund, and very aggressively going after increasing our revenues, our business revenues. I think we need to have a good model that we're all talking about, and have a little bit of concern about some of the ad hoc information regarding kaka'ako that appears in the presentations and in the newspaper. So I think that's something we're going to have to look at very carefully, but we need to increase revenues. The second thing, I just want again to emphasize the importance of having a way that we can measure the effectiveness of each budget item, so that we as trustees at the board, when it hits us, can actually judge whether or not something has value and priority to us and is effective. And so once again, I encourage us to develop a PPBS, a planning, programming, and budgeting system that could also come to the board level to help us do that planning. And the third recommendation, I think this is worth repeating here, is it will be good for us to consider reinstating the Budget and Finance Committee, because this is a lot of work, and I appreciate the work that RM Chair is doing along with your ad hoc Finance Committee. But we really need, for the purposes of analysis and for accountability, and to be able to interact with our administration, we need a full committee really working on revenues and budgeting as well. That's all, and I thank you again.
Anybody else?
Sorry, the meeting went longer than I expected. So I pulled out September 28, 2016 minutes when Chair Colette Machado was the RM. I feel like we're going in circles. You know, you weren't here yet.
No, not yet.
This is what the agenda is. Presentation by Resource Management Land Assets, update overview of Kaka'ako They went out and did this September 2016. Consultation with General Counsel Ernie Kimuro about our power duty privileges on Office of Hawaiian Affairs Fiscal Sustainability Plan by Spire. So they advocated, I have all of Spire's workshop papers here. He's been telling us about getting more revenue up, looking at how we can make highest, best use of what we have, because the needs are so great. And that's why I was upset coming out. KP, I'm sorry that I said that about it's a waste of time and money going out again. Because that takes money to take staff to go Kauai, Maui, maybe Oahu is okay. But going out and an update where we didn't have an EIS yet. Did you see the news yesterday? The water level will rise and cover all. I'm at Hilton Hawaiian Village. We're looking at that seriously, because tomorrow, June 1st, hurricane season starts. We're already getting warnings that water level is going to go into our lagoon, rise up and cover all our first floor. I thought it was just, I don't want to say waste of time, but I think our beneficiaries understand all of that. They don't need to spend money, go out there, because when I heard from a beneficiary that when he went to the meeting, they asked Malia if the trustees were aware of it, and she said, yeah, I wasn't aware of it. I'm just sorry. Thank you.
So just as a follow-up to Trustee Ahutisa is, and not to belabor the point, but I think one of the benefits that came out of the meeting is that we are bridging the gap and trying to be transparent, not just with Native Hawaiian beneficiaries, but those who will be impacted right in the community of Kaka'ako. And as you know, the red shirts, Kiwalo, they have been the most staunch opponents against development. But what I can say is that they are very open to working with OHA on whatever the board chooses to move forward with. And I think in that respect, the community outreach has been um, valuable because, as Trustee Apo was the mediator with them, and so now we have people sort of at the table willing to discuss versus being just oppositional to what our plans are. Um, but I agree. I mean, I think that what you're referring to in terms of the agenda back then regarding the fiscal sustainability plan really is the 50,000 foot that we believe is not just administration in support of the board, but the board's responsibility is looking at the long-term vision of what SPAR had indicated in terms of the totality of growing our trust,
No,
the
I get them.
longevity in terms
My,
of,
I'm sorry, my point was the update would be that we exchange that land for something we can build now.
I,
That's what my update would be instead of rehashing this thing. Anyway,
yeah.
I don't mean to belabor this either. I just thought I'd bring it up.
But I think that's a board decision. That's a board decision that requires board discussion,
Yeah.
and kind of an
Later on,
executive
we
session,
can.
right? So there's a lot of balls that we're juggling
Yeah.
that we have to really consider what we do with that within the next 4 or 5 years because of the construction swing upward would make it a prime time in 2021, 22, 23. But if we are there, we're there to be prepared to execute the master plan, and if not, we need to look at other options before that. All I'm saying is that I think if we can get through the biennial budget by the end of this month, the board would need to return to get back on course of the fiscal sustainability plan and all of these issues about how the organization looks at concrete strategies for short-term, mid-term, and long-term um, strategies for increasing revenue. I mean, I think we've laid a foundation for some long-term things that hopefully will um, will will actualize within the next 2 years. That's our um, public land trust resolution and kakakomakai. In the meantime, we probably will benefit not just looking entirely on our commercial properties, but looking more creatively at some innovative ideas from a business perspective that will help us beneficially as a trust.
Talk to you later.
Thank you, Kamala.
Yes.
I just want to say that the Fiscal Sustainability Advisory Committee has been on hold because they're so involved in preparing the biennium budget, and we're prepared to get back on track first part of July. So, and anxiously actually trying to get back on track. So if there's no further questions,
Move
I'd
to
like to
adjourn, Madam Chair.
aole, aole, mahalo.
We get one more piece. I'm sorry.
Mahalo to our staff for all the hard work, and I know that you folks have been working over the weekend. Didn't have family time in the 3 days, so
I would like to again acknowledge John Kim
I'd like to
and
acknowledge
Gloria
him
and
too.
his staff. They have been really working under some
Yes, thank you
unusual
so much,
circumstances, but
John,
it's
Lisa,
really paid off.
and David. You getting your feet wet?
Hello, Lisa.
We
David.
have two beneficiaries that have asked for time. First, Jermaine Myers.
David, you still want the job?
Yes.
John, good.
King.
Aloha.
Aloha.
My name is Jermaine Myers. I'm an OHA beneficiary for beneficiary advocacy and empowerment in the Lesti of Nanakuli Hawaiian Homestead. Today, May 31st, 2017, I submit to you data, views, and arguments in writing and by oral testimony regarding the agenda item 3, workshop on fiscal year 18-19 biennial budget. Bread and butter. According to HRS Chapter 10, trustees must must provide an accounting of the funds expended and an accounting of the effectiveness of programs undertaken. In today's budget workshop number 3, an accounting of funds expended in the previous biennium budget fiscal year 16 and 17, you can check off were not provided by the trustees. In today's budget workshop number 3, May 31st, 2017, an accounting of the effectiveness of programs undertaken, you can also check were not provided by the trustees. Trustees and administrator have discretionary funds, 22,000 per trustee per year, 150,000 for administrator CEO per year. I've attached a TGI, the Garden Isle story titled About 40 Attend OHA Board Meeting Thursday, posted on Friday, May 12. In the article, it explains how Punahou, a Kikaha resident and Hawaiian national, asked OHA board members for financial support. I understand the trustees' discretionary funds can be given to non-incorporated individuals that are not affiliated with a nonprofit or for-profit organization. I'm wondering if the Kauai trustee encouraged Punahou to come to the meeting because the Kauai trustee already gave some of his discretionary funds to Punahou. I would like the record to show that we, the beneficiaries, myself and my ohana, would like OHA trustees to remove from the budget the $150,000 administration CEO discretionary funds per year. We believe that the administrator CEO should not have any discretionary funds. Only the 9 elected trustees should be budgeted to receive $22,000 per year in discretionary funds. I hope on July 1st, 2017, Kauai trustee will use his discretionary funds in service of and to the Kauai beneficiaries. Personnel budget. Personnel budget. I provide for your consideration that OHA has more employees and expends more trust revenue for personnel salaries and fringe benefits in the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, another state agency that services Native Hawaiians and Hawaiians. OHA has 164 employees. DHHL has 132 employees. OHA expends $10,543,524 in 2016 for the base pay in salaries. DHHL was on the high side, $7,671,371. On the low side, $6.6 million. In addition, more employees of OHA versus DHHL are paid higher than $50,000 and higher than $100,000, and I gave you the figures there. In 2016, OHA paid 128 employees more than $50,000 as compared to DHHL that paid only 81 employees. In 2016, OHA paid 11 employees more than $100,000 as compared to DHHL with only 6 employees. As a matter of fact, in 2016, OHA administrator was paid $150,000. DHHL's chairman and commissioner was paid $136,000. The governor of the state of Hawaii was paid less at $149,000. And the governor's chief of staff and lieutenant governor were both $145,000. I also would like to give you testimony regarding the attachments that you have in your hand. It is my understanding that on or about March 9, 2017, the Resource Management Committee approved the addition of, among other people, Davis Price to the Audit Advisory Committee. In that capacity, Davis Price had the opportunity to provide his input as to the scope and depth of the audit. The Audit Advisory Committee was tasked with the preparation of a request for qualifications for the Forensic Financial and Management Audit of OHA and its subsidiaries, LLCs. This included OHA's issuing of grants. As you know, Hi'ipoi is the entity that formerly owned and operated the Makaveli Poi Mill. There was much controversy surrounding OHA's purchase, issuance of grants to, and disposal of this business. Hi'ipoi no longer owns the Makaveli Poi Mill. However, at the May 25, 2017 meeting last week, OHA's Board of Trustees, Mona Bernardino, informed us that OHA and its subsidiary Hi'ilealoha continues to funnel money into its Hi'ipoi LLC via grants. See Exhibit A. Aloha Aina Poi Company currently conducts.
Sorry to interrupt. Are you reading from a text?
No, I'm reading from my paper.
Oh,
It doesn't have to be written. It doesn't have to be written.
Oh, I'm reading from my paper and I give you guys the attachments.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Hi'ipoi no longer owns the Makaveli Poi Mill, however, I told you about that. Aloha Aloha Aina Poi Company currently conducts poi processing operations at the location of the Makaveli Poi Mill, see Exhibit B. Aloha Aina Poi Company was a sponsor of the Aloha Aina Music Festival in 2012, see Exhibit C. I'm almost done. I have been informed that Aloha Aina Music Festival hired High Rise Entertainment LLC to promote the music festival, see Exhibit D. Aloha Aina Poi Company and High Rise Entertainment LLC are for-profit businesses owned in whole or in part by Davis Price, see Exhibit E. My concern of the RM committee and trustees is that when you voted unanimously for David Price to be a member of the Audit Advisory Committee, did you know of his financial interest in Aloha Aina Poi Company and High Rise Entertainment LLC? And then if this surfaced later, would it have compromised the audit? E hana kako.
Thank you, Jermaine.
Yeah, the Articles of Organization, which is Exhibit E, will list to you. I watched a meeting last week, and Mona Bernardino had said that Makaveli Poi was now managed by Kaina Makua. So if you look at Exhibit E, the Articles of Organization, you'll see Kaina Makua as one of the organizers of that nonprofit, and then you'll see Davis Price below him for Exhibit E, the Articles of Organization. So that was my concern because I was watching, I have the screenshots of the presentation, and it was showing a lot about the relationship with Kaina Makua regarding the mill, and then however the Articles of Organization show that Davis Price is part of that organization that
Trustee
is
Aquino,
getting
you had a
grant
question?
money.
Yes, just one. Could I get a copy of what you've just read regarding Davis Price
Okay.
and Bona Bergadino? I don't seem to have that here.
No, I haven't given it. I was just reading it, and then I'll go ahead and give you guys. I didn't have time to print this up. I actually ran out of paper because of the color.
You want
Thank
to say
you.
something?
Thank you.
Vicky?
Yes, I just wanted to clarify, Jermaine, your first testimony regarding discretionary funds
Yeah.
by trustees who have a trustee allowance.
Yes.
I've never had a discretionary fund.
Okay.
Actually, when I came on board, I actually got rid of it, and so I think the confusion is that the sponsorships were under me, and the sponsorships, what we did is those sponsorships are, like for fundraisers, tables, and so forth. We came up with a process where now it's handled by our grants, and
Okay.
so whenever there's a fundraiser or a festival or something, we just refer it down to grants.
Okay, because the conference that I went to last month, earlier this month, about a month going by fast. They said that they just got monies. They said, "Oh, Kamano gave us some money for help feed the people." So, I thought it was from your discretionary
Sponsorship.
Yeah.
Yeah, what conference was that?
The Aloha Aina in Makaha. Yeah, they thank OHA and they said
Yeah, so
thank
that's
you
a
specifically.
community outreach sponsorship.
That's under the discretionary or
No,
under
no, no.
this.
They have sponsorship budgets.
It's under community engagement.
Each PAYA has sponsorship budgets, small, but they have.
Oh, okay.
So he's saying that the community outreach PAYA
Yeah.
or department
Yeah.
gave that particular
Okay. Okay.
grant.
Awesome.
So thank you, Jermaine. I'm going to call on Leimomi Khan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Troy.
Thank you.
Aloha, Chair. Good morning, everybody. I need
Aloha.
aloha. I need to preface what I'm going to say with letting you know a little bit about me and my past experiences because it's relevant to what I'm going to say, relevant to the budget. I have been a kumuhula in my lifetime. Many years ago, I am even in one of the books named Nana I Kumuhula, the first one published by the Keiki Hula organizers. I have been involved very intimately in my life, throughout my life, with all of the hula competitions except for Mary Monarch. So very involved with Keiki Hula, backstage manager, supporter of all of the judges. The Kamehameha Hula competition, and in fact, I wrote some of the rules and judging sheets for some of these hula competitions. I have been the president of the Association of Hawaiian Civic Clubs, and in that capacity, very involved with the Prince Kuhio Festival. I've been a commissioner on the King Kamehameha Celebration Commission, very involved in the commission. I have been the No Vote, No Grumble chairman for about 3 years for the state of Hawaii. So having said all of that, I need to express some concerns about perhaps the process or the way that OHA goes about evaluating its grants for activities like the Prince Lot Hula Festival, where I note in the summary that was given to you this morning, $10,000 for sponsorship. And then I note $25,000 for the Keiki Hula sponsorship. And then I note that the King Kamehameha Celebration Commission, who has been struggling at the legislature to have the state again support the commission with reorganizing it and providing funds, that they received $1,500 from OHA. I think about CNHA, I think about the Association of Hawaiian Civic Clubs, who do advocacy work for our community. They don't just do the cultural work. They actually, all 300 to 500 delegates who go to these conventions, sit and discuss for over 3 days in committees and on the floor issues that are important to our Native Hawaiian community. But the work doesn't stop there. They are at the legislature every year. They are here, like myself. And we also work with other Native Hawaiian organizations. My voice is wavering because I'm just so upset by what I see. I just think that there is an imbalance in recognizing the work that each group does and in how we fund them. For festivals such as the Prince Kuhio and the King Kamehameha one, I think if one looks at those festivals through a Western lens, then definitely all you would see it as is just a celebration. It is much more than that. I mean, think about, not only does it give the organizers leadership development skills, but culturally, all of our people are out learning about, for example, little things like picking the flowers and how you do that in our forests. Sustainability, how do we do that? All the pule that goes with that, and so much more. So we can't look at it through those kinds of lenses. So what I'm advocating here is that I really think, Kamana'o, that there needs to be some distinction between festivals and conventions. The work is very different. The contributions are very different. 1 or 2 lasts for a day or 2 or a month. Others, their work continues through the whole year. I think number 2, that with regard to get out the vote, I noticed that you are eliminating, it says here, reduction, elimination of various CE contracts, and you have listed get out to vote initiatives. I think more than any other time in our history, we need our Native Hawaiians out there registering to vote and actually being at the voting polls. Okay, we really need that, so I urge you to put that back in the budget. Do not cut that. Number 3, we need advocacy both at the state legislature and at national level. I want to suggest get the people together who can help you to lobby. Besides OHA, I know you have a Washington, D.C. office. But I also know, for example, that I'm sure Robin won't mind my using her name. They do an excellent job in Washington, D.C. in lobbying. We try the civic clubs when we have our mainland council meet there. We go to visit all 50 state legislators. Use us, get us together, let us strategize. This business of cutting the grants that we are getting, or the monies that we are getting in the Trump budget, needs more than just OHA's voice at the table. It needs our voice as the people. The other thing I would like to ask is, could you please post a copy of the budget with an explanation prior to the meeting at which you will be voting? I heard that you look at the budget a couple times before you finally vote. Could you please do that? Because certainly people like me and others want to be able to see very, very clearly what the budget looks like. I don't want to be the kind of person who comes here after you make the decision at grumbles. If I'm going to grumble at you, I want to grumble at you while you're still in the phase of making your decisions. I want to be able, as a leader of several Hawaiian organizations, of supporting the work of the OHA trustees and being able to explain why you made the decisions that you made. Mahalo nui loa for this opportunity.
Thank you, Leimomi. Robin Danner?
Thank you, Leimomi. That was awesome. Aloha, trustees, and Kamana'o. I got up at 5 a.m. to come over here from Kauai. But I'm glad I did. I really enjoyed the meeting, so thank you. I feel compelled to testify on the budget issue for a couple of reasons. For the first time, homestead leaders across the state spent 10 days suffering with me, working with me to review the OHA budget for the first time really in 90 years of ever really looking at the OHA budget. So I want to thank the members of the SHA, and I want to thank CNHA for helping us to do that work and then present you, I hope, with a comprehensive review of that document. After listening today, I also want to compliment the administration for now. Will be the second version from the first. I know more about the OHA budget than I care to, but I want to say that in general, when I look at today's, and I agree with Auntie Leimomi about getting the information, essentially the $1 million that has been saved, the administration did their job. The $1 million that is reflected in the cost savings is really $1 million from unspent funds from 2017. I just want to make sure you got that, because it's all around this or that, but essentially the $1 million, 24,000 is from savings from 2017. And how you backfilled, or how the administration, and I salute you, how you backfilled the grant reductions was by basically cutting two major areas. As Leimomi said, 200,000 out of CE grants on Get Out the Vote, craziness. I don't think you should do that. We should figure out a different way. But this is for the OHA board to do. And second, you cut $113,000 out of travel. Okay, that's how you backfilled the loss from the general funds. The $1 million now, I can already see the writing on the wall. The Board of Trustees is going to take $500,000 of that $1 million savings and do it toward the audit. I can already see that. If you left the $1 million in the corpus, then you would get Trustee Akina's desire of the 4.5% reduction. This is my feeling. You shouldn't change the 4.5%. You should stay at 5% until 2020, until the next biennium. Don't go too quick. Stay at 5%. Keep that $1 million. Go ahead and use $500,000 for the audit, although I think it's a waste of money, but I understand. I want to say that I'd like to say to the administration, you did the right thing. But now, Board of Trustees, it's up to you. You folks talk about increasing revenue, you scare me to death. let's clean up LLCs first. We're having to do a forensic audit. I don't think we can push our funds to generate revenue. Maybe in 2020, after we clean up the audit, we clean up the LLCs. But the biggest thing, my message I wanted to say to you today, and it disappointed me, but I hope that the Board of Trustees will stand up. No one talks about personnel reduction. I'm not sure the Board of that is not for the administration to do. Their job is to fight for every dollar and bloat out their staffing. But this board has got to recognize that $14 million in staff to give out $6 million in grants is crazy. Nobody does that. Ford Foundation doesn't do it. Pew, nobody. So really, I hope that in the future conversations, that this board will do something major, something bold that our beneficiaries are waiting for, which is to make a commitment to attrition, that any jobs over the next biennium are frozen and cannot be refilled unless the Board of Trustees, it's justified. For every dollar, we cannot spend 60 cents on benefit fringe, 60 cents on every dollar. That is a loser. And the way to solve that, and I think Leimomi alluded to it, outsource the tasks. At the Shaw, at our homestead associations, at NHEC, at Papaololokahi, I guarantee you we ain't paying 60 cents for fringe. We're paying more like 28 cents. So you need to do something bold, which is to outsource employees and those funds to Native Hawaiian organizations. We are a different community than we were 20 years ago. We have capacity. We have amazing organizations that are rocking it now. And now OHA's new role needs to be to outsource our own resources to us, outsource the good talent that you've got, stop paying 60 cents, and give it to the organizations that can be like speed cars around rather than the big Titanic.
Robin, in all fairness to our administration, they have frozen 9 positions.
Yes.
And they have a challenge of cutting 10 more.
Yes,
So
let's triple that.
That has been talked about, just not on the table today.
No, I'm aware. I'm saying that the Board of Trustees, it's not up to them anymore. I think it's up to the Board of Trustees to say.
The board is the one that
I want
made
you
the
to know
challenge.
how huge your staff is in comparison to other organizations. And the administration cannot be asked to do it. It's got to be the board to say, we are going to cut 18% of staff before the end of this biennium, either through attrition or layoffs or whatever. But I think we can do it through attrition. And I'll sum up my remarks. I just wanted to make sure. I think you have an imbalance in your grants budget. We have a homeless crisis, yet we only fund $250,000 a year for housing, $500,000 for culture, $2.7 million for education, $250,000 for housing. So I'd ask that you kind of consider that. And that's not cutting or adding, that is just rebalancing.
Actually, it's $3,250,000. Don't forget, we gave Hawaiian Homes $3 million.
Yeah, we should have a talk about that.
Yeah.
I want to share with you back in 2012, a resolution passed by this board of directors and the commissioners of the Department of Hawaiian Homelands that for the support of homesteaders in the $200 million ceded land settlement, in the $200 million that got you kaka'ako, one of the issues that was raised in a beautifully written resolution, you committed, OHA, that you would recognize there are 2 trusts and 2 categories of beneficiaries, and that this trust would serve the small ends. We have waited 5 years to bring this to your attention. It is signed by the chairperson of DHHL and, Colette Machado.
Yes. February 23rd, 2012.
So I think we've got to, and the exciting part about it, we've waited 5 years. We have not come knocking on OHA's door saying, what are you going to give to us? What are you going to give to us? We spent 5 years building our capacity, and I'm here to tell you, we need to have a grant section that's not about small ends. It's about homestead associations that are doing facility development that's serving big ends. We are building successful economic development projects, trustee knows, employing small end, big end, we're employing no end. We're ready, and I think OHA can put in $250,000 every year to homestead association projects. Um, uh, we're ready. And you would then be fulfilling a commitment you made that brought $200 million to our trust. This is why we documented it, Colette. We never believe.
I get 'em right here. Knew you was coming today. You can get your testimony dated May 2nd.
And my last one, Chair, is to ask that it be part of the budget approval process, that there be a condition of the Board of Trustees approving that you mandate that an inventory of duplicative services being done, an inventory of what are Native Hawaiian beneficiary organizations doing that duplicates what OHA is doing so that we can have better partnerships, streamline our funds. And then my last one is, trustee, thank you for raising the scariness of losing federal dollars. So the time is not, we do need to keep advocacy up, but I tell you this, we don't need to wring our hands. We need to invest a little bit of money, less than $100,000 a year, in grant training in our community on non-native specific federal grant programs. We need to now turn the corner and get our Native Hawaiian organizations up to par to be able to compete in the regular minority health, in the Native Hawaiian, not Native Hawaiian, the charter school. It's awesome to be a charter school in the Trump administration. Let's go after those specific grants. Let's start teaching our community the tests of the existing federal grants that we haven't touched before. Let's do it now, and all it needs is about $75,000 to $80,000, and we can leverage that and turn that into millions of dollars. Our Native Hawaiian organizations are something to be very proud of. You should be very proud of the growth that's happened over the last 20 years. It's quite amazing. So thank you very much.
So Robin, in all fairness to our administration, they have already started looking at duplicating services in our communities.
Taking an inventory.
They have.
Thank you.
Leopold?
Yeah, just quick. Robin, I think we're really warming up to the notion that I spoke about earlier, about partnerships.
Yeah.
About harm. So I don't want to put you on the spot, but if we were talking about legacy institutions that would be on our legacy list of continued support, we really need to do that. A list.
I could. I can ring off a few off of the mic. Yeah, I could. I know some of them better than I want to sometimes. But Native Hawaiian organizations, like any other community, goes valleys and mountains. Valleys and mountains in terms of capacity. But easily, Association of Hawaiian Civic Clubs, easily the Council for Native Hawaiian Advancement, easily the Shaw, 30 years old. These are organizations that don't go by the wayside no matter what hurricane happens in our community. There's a list of maybe half a dozen that have been there from day one, and these are organizations that we rely upon. And as Leimomi said, they are the go-to when there's a crisis, right? When there's a crisis, they're a go-to. But we could certainly put that list together. Michelle has 23 organizations, executive directors on her board. There are charter schools that would be legacy because of their innovation and ability to bring along and teach other charter schools, et cetera. But absolutely, I think it's a fantastic idea.
Thank you, Robin. And trustees, we have half an hour to grab a bite to eat, and then we have the BAE joint RM meeting at 1 o'clock. So,
The continuation, yes, Robert?
yeah.
Oh, that's right. On the community grants.
Okay,
Robert, don't leave. We have another meeting.
I'll entertain a motion for adjourn.
Yeah.
It's been moved and adjourned. All in favor, say aye.